Quick points I want to make before you hear them. The first is that what you heard at the beginning, that short bit, those few seconds, are really all I can hear in them, which is to say, to my mind, there is continuous repetition, and proportionately they are a bit boring. My second point is that they are terribly loud. You couldn't quite hear that because, of course, from your sets, it isn't as loud as it is here in the studio and as it was in the festival hall in the Queen Elizabeth Hall on Friday. I will ask them about that when we come to talk. My third point is that perhaps I'm a little bit too much of a musician to fully appreciate them. And the reason why I say this is that, they have an audience, and people who have an audience ought to be heard. Perhaps it's my fault that I don't appreciate them. Well, if I first may turn to Roger, I want to ask one fundamental question, of which our televiewers may not be quite aware, the significance of it, because they didn't hear all of it. Why has it all got to be so terribly loud? For me, frankly, it's too loud. I just can't bear it. I happen to have grown up in the string quartet, which is a bit softer. So, why has it got to be so loud, so amplified?
Well, I don't guess it has to be, but I mean, that's the way we like it. And we didn't grow up with a string quartet, and I guess that could be one of the reasons why it is loud. And it doesn't sound terribly loud to us.
Yes, actually, not everybody who hasn't grown up in a string quartet turns into a loud pop group, so your reason is not altogether convincing, but I accept that you like it.
In 1985, Roger Waters, founder member of Pink Floyd, handed in his resignation. For those who weren't up on the band's history, it may have signaled the end, but the band had survived the loss of a key member once before.
I was attached to the training department of what was then British European Airways, and the only nice thing about it was 5% flights at the weekends. And the chap who became my partner, Peter Jenner, was teaching at the LSE, and he was bored with that. And I heard about the Pink Floyd, and I thought that's the one to manage. As for the band themselves, you had a tough cookie in Roger, a man who, if he hadn't been in rock and roll, I'm sure would have been an enormously successful architect. You had Nick with a wonderful showbiz instinct, and Rick giving it the basis of the musical skills. And you had a genius in Sid. So it was a lucky combination.
I first heard of the Pink Floyd in, I guess it was the summer of '66, when Peter Jenner brought me a tape. And subsequently I went to see them in Powis Square at the London Free School, which was a rather idealistic Notting Hill Gate organization.
And the idea was there was going to be a free school which anyone could go to and learn all about exciting things like Gnostic religions and how to grow your own magic mushrooms. And we thought the Pink Floyd should play there, so they did.
Powis Gardens was important because it was the first time that we were booked in our own name and actually drew a crowd on that name.
I brought record company people down, and I was stunned that they couldn't see it exactly. People were interested, but they weren't exactly falling all over themselves. And I thought, this is obvious, this is great, this is going to be, this is a hit.
It was absolutely delightful. At the time when it was considered fashionable to be rather cool, and no one introduced anyone to anyone else, so that you could spend whole parties just addressing people as man. And Sid was someone who'd sort of come up and say, "Hi, I'm Sid," and so on. I mean, he was a really easygoing, outgoing personality.
He was a very good painter, he was a very good actor, he was a lovely, handsome boy with lots of girlfriends. You couldn't think of a more well-rounded, integrated, happy bloke.
I remember when Sid joined the band, he had all these incredible ideas, lyrically and musically. Very strange. And very childish in a way, some of his stuff. I mean, it's kind of fairy tales and all this stuff, but totally unique. I'd never heard anything like it, and it was fabulous.
He brought the ability to play the guitar, which was quite unusual at that time. I suppose also he brought the ability to perform, and eventually, I mean, obviously not immediately, but eventually he brought songwriting. And I think I was probably unaware of the politics of Joe Boyd going on over that period, because of course what happened was Joe Boyd was the initial producer, and then was really rode out when we signed with EMI.
Basically, I think we felt, let's be on the same label as the Beatles. So we signed with EMI.
Once they did the deal with EMI, EMI had a policy in those days of their own studios, their own producers. Once you signed to EMI, you were in-house. And so I was very much shut out.
It's interesting that it didn't occur to us to make a fuss about who was going to produce us. We didn't say, no, that's our decision, it's nothing to do with you. We said, yes, okay, we sort of gave in. To work at Abbey Road in those days was a wonderful experience.
I was just very, very excited. Doing your first album, putting down your music onto tape, and knowing that the Beatles are next door doing Sgt. Pepper. Because I was a bit of a snob before then. I was a real jazzo. And I didn't really believe that pop music meant anything at all. When I heard Sgt. Pepper, it changed my attitude to what people like us could do.
Syd Barrett turned out to be one of the great English songwriters of the late 1960s. I mean, if you listen to Pipe at the Gates of Dawn now, it almost makes you cry what a great talent was lost there.
The Floyd agreed to come back in May and play a sort of farewell gig at UFO. And the news that the Floyd were playing meant that it was absolutely jammed. There were queues around the block. And I was standing there counting money and taking tickets and overseeing the door. And the Floyd arrived, and they had to sort of squeeze past me. And so everyone was like, "Hi, Joe, how are you?" And they were all passing very close to my face. And Syd was the last one in. And I'll never forget that, because I just looked him right in the eye as he went right past me. And it was as if somebody just flicked the switch out. And that light that had always been in his eyes, and that glint, that mischievous look, was just gone. It was a chemical problem. I mean, he took too many drugs in a very short space of time. Not so long after that, they got Dave Gilmour to come in and play behind him to sort of fill in for when Syd wasn't playing.
I'd known Syd since I was about 14. It was hard dealing with sort of replacing one of my close friends and having to see one of my close friends who is no longer sort of functioning as a normal human being.
I have a lot of sympathy with the band at that time, which other people don't necessarily have, but I do because I was there. And that was that if a member of the band is literally playing a different tune, it gets quite hard. I mean, there was no way, if you like, would the band wanted to or had any reason to, because if you think about it, it's kind of artistic and commercial suicide to lop off your, vital creative juices. I mean, it doesn't make any sense.
Well, we're all very close to him. It was very difficult because we had decided at this point that what we wanted to do was Syd become rather like a Brian Wilson, if you like, and stay at home and write. Because we knew by then it was impossible, he couldn't perform on stage. So I had to say things like, "Syd, I'm going out to get some cigarettes," and then go off and do a gig and come back the next day. And it was awful. I mean, it was a terrible time. Eventually, of course, he understood what was happening.
The band separated from their management, Andrew King and Peter Jenner, who had no faith in a Pink Floyd without Barrett.
They felt, and I think with some justification, that Syd was the talent that they'd discovered and that they would stick with him, and that if we didn't want to work with Syd, well, that was the way it would go, which from most outsiders would have seen that as a sensible decision to make, I think.
We did, I think, 5 gigs with both Syd and I in the band together. Syd he seemed to cheer up a little bit when I was there. I guess maybe it took some pressure off him, and I sort of learnt up the parts like the record and played them, and sometimes Syd sang a bit and sometimes he didn't. But it was obviously not going to be, it became very obvious that it wasn't going to continue for very long like that. And on, I think it must have been the 6th one that we would have done together, which I think was at Southampton University. we just never picked him up. Someone said, shall we pick up Sid? And someone else said, nah, let's not bother. And that was the end.
David Gilmour assumed a permanent role in the band as lead singer in 1968.
The band got me in to be a front person, yes. I mean, to cover Sid's parts, I suspect, at the time, mostly to try and, eke out our career a little bit longer. My guitar style and Sid's guitar style were not even close. So it was very difficult to know exactly what to do. It took a while for me to settle in.
Back in the past, in the very early days, we tried to have hit singles. There was one called Apples and Orange.
I was asked to do Atom Heart Mother. I suppose because Roger could see that I could work. I wasn't a nutter. I'm a craftsman, and I crafted Atom Heart Mother.
It was already a complete piece before Ron came on the scene, and we decided to get him to do some orchestrations.
In the early 1970s, they underwent an extraordinary transformation, and I think this was really down to Roger Waters and Dave Gilmour between them, really starting to get serious in a way about what they were about. Roger Waters provided them with a kind of theatrical and conceptual framework, and Dave Gilmour, I believe, with the assistance of the others, but principally him, provided them with a kind of musical edge.
Roger was the pushiest person. Certainly, he was the main driving force behind what was going on, yes.
The most remarkable thing was the way that he did take over when Sid left. I mean, his one song on Piper at the Gates of Dawn is not a great song, but he applied himself to becoming a songwriter and became a terrific one.
I think Roger had a good balance at the time. He had a good balance of passion and intelligence.
But set against that is the fact that Dave's guitar work, in contradistinction to all the other aspects of Floyd you think about, is actually very, very lyrical and very melodic.
Shine On You Crazy Diamond was not just a bunch of old hippies sort of bemoaning their youth, it was bemoaning somebody that they genuinely loved. It's an album which is plainly haunted by Syd Barrett, who, quite coincidentally, turned up while they were recording Shine On You Crazy Diamond.
And this chap walked in and no one recognised him, and we've always argued about who spotted him first. I naturally think I did. No one really knows, but there was a certain point where people were sort of nudging each other, going, bloody hell, that's Sid. And no one recognised him at all.
It was a real shock because I hadn't seen him really since his breakdown, when he was this very good looking guy, and this is huge bloated guy of about 18 stone. Why would he turn up? Why would actually writing a song about him? Very strange.
He's still a part of the band in a way. They still play Shine On You Crazy Diamond first in the set. Everybody knows, everyone who cares about Pink Floyd, accept him as the fifth member.
I do think about him, and I think about when we started, and I have a, it's a fantasy. I would love one day for Sid to walk into my room and say, I'm ready to play in the band again.
The Pig was a huge dirigible that was actually floated above Battersea Power Station, and we had a marksman, down to shoot it. Because if it were to escape this dirigible, then there could be what is called a rather large insurance claim. And we were all there, the Pig didn't go up. I don't know why. We all came back the next day, but we decided not to bother with the marksman, so the Pig went up the next day and escaped. And it broke loose of a mooring rope. So, of course, the day we didn't have the marksman was the day the Pig got out. The Pig got up and it went up in the air, and was reportedly seen by various jetliners heading for Heathrow.
I didn't really like a lot of the music on the album. I have to say I didn't fight very hard to put my stuff on, and I didn't have anything to put on. I mean, I played on it, and I think I played well, but I didn't contribute to the writing of it. But I think also Roger is kind of not letting me do that. This was the start of the whole ego thing, I think, in the band. Animals.
They'd shout for what they wanted, or their favourite songs, or whatever. And you could, inevitably, and quite rightly, Roger was pretty distressed at the fact that they weren't listening to the music.
And when he said he wanted to build a wall across the audience, I thought, this is absolutely insane. But he was right, and I was wrong.
Roger had done a demo of the whole thing, and it was excruciating to listen to, but you could tell instantly that there was a great idea in there.
I made a decision then, well, I can't work with this guy anymore anyway. I don't want to. I don't like this band anymore the way it is. And I left.
I felt that Roger was resurrecting tracks that we had not accepted for the Wall album. And I did say to him, they weren't good enough then, why are they good enough now? It got so difficult that Roger wanted me to not have a say in what was going on the production side of the album. So after a lot of arguing and umming and ahhing and soul-searching, I agreed to come off the production credits.
It was dreadful, really. It was dreadful. It's not the way a band should make records, and I think we all thought that. Roger certainly thought it, because he left the band shortly afterwards. What I'm still conscious of are the 20 years of friendship and enjoyment we had together when the band was running along in a smoother way. And there's not many other people that I'd have rather had in the band.
I thought that out there in record land, that people did kind of identify me with quite a lot of the work that went into the Floyd. But they don't.
That's about your writing on the new LP. It seems that old undercurrent, Floyd undercurrent of madness, of interest in madness.
I mean, it's not an obsession with madness particularly. I mean, I don't think there's anything particularly on the new album about madness, is there?
It strikes me that not so much madness, more depression.
Well,
pointlessness of life, almost.
Yes, well, that's something that I think about. I don't know, it's from a different angle than the way Roger wrote, but I don't know, maybe it's catching. So sometimes in my darker moments I ponder on those things and sometimes write about them.
Is that when you write, in your darker moments?
Often, yeah, because the darker emotions tend to be the more powerful ones. And it's hard to write a happy song.
How much effect
except for John Denver.
did Sid Barrett have on you? Because it strikes me you were the closest to him. You taught him a lot of the guitar playing.
We were friends from when we were 14. We went on holidays together in the south of France.
And welcome to Pink Floyd drummer Nick Mason. We're going to be discussing Dark Side of the Moon, perhaps one of the most important rock albums to be released. That's later on in the show. But first up, we're going to talk about some of your favourite music. And we have John Lennon and the Beatles down. And I just wondered if the Beatles were an influence at all on Pink Floyd.
Oh, yes, I think so. I think the Beatles probably were an influence on virtually every band that's ever existed. And I still clearly remember sort of being taken in to meet them when we were recording our first album, Piper at the Gates of Dawn, at Abbey Road, and they were recording Sgt. Pepper. And it was a bit like being sort of taken in to meet the royal family, only rather better.
Were they good? Were they, like, you know, generous toward other people coming in and seeing them in the studio working?
Oh, yes. Very nice. Very easy. And indeed, on Dark Side, we actually did record some pieces of Paul McCartney and Linda McCartney talking to use as possible links between, I think... no, I can't remember exactly which sections we were planning to use them on, and then in fact we just ended up using some other voices instead.
We're going to talk about that a bit later, but I want to ask you, why were they not used actually on the album, Paul and Linda?
Well, we have very high standards, you know, and no, it just wasn't quite right. It worked better, we felt, with voices that were not specific, recognisable celebrities perhaps, and we wanted slightly different characters.
Sure. We've got John Lennon and Imagine as the video that we're going to play next. Why do you think it is that John Lennon seems to have gone from strength to strength? I suppose it's a bit like Marilyn Monroe in that sense. Someone dies and their image and myth carries on. But he seems to be even more than that. There's new generations coming again and again who are buying his music and getting into John Lennon. Why do you think his appeal has continued to grow, in fact?
Well, I think it's the writing. I mean, I think it's the lyrics, perhaps, particularly. They still mean quite a lot, and well, they still mean a lot. I think the songs have lasted astonishingly well.
Yeah. Peter Gabriel and Kate Bush were a pair that you really liked, his music you really liked. So we're going to be playing off Peter Gabriel's So album, Don't Give Up, which has the two of them together. Is there any particular period of their careers that you prefer, as opposed to maybe what they're doing now?
No, not really. I think it's one of the things that quite often makes a favourite artist is someone where you can say you've enjoyed work over a period of 10 or 15 years or whatever.
Yeah.
And I think that's true of both Kate and Peter Gabriel.
Yeah. Do you like them together on the Don't Give Up single? That was from 1986.
Yes, I do, but I thought it was a particularly clever choice since I had mentioned them both to go for the combination.
But there's another connection as well, isn't there? Because wasn't it Dave Gilmour who in fact did discover Kate Bush, or in fact...
Yes, that's quite right. It's a really unusual thing to happen. I mean, I think everyone in the music business gets sent endless piles of cassettes.
Right.
Most of which really aren't... There's not very much that can be done with them. You don't immediately hear something that's brilliant. I'm sure most of us would probably pass over the Beatles and if given the chance. Right. But in the case of Kate Bush, she sent in some tapes and it was immediate that there was something special there.
Yeah. Do you yourself get sent, do people sort of think about Pink Floyd, or send them a tape because they might just pick up on me and pass it on to the right person in the right place? Or
Yes, they do. I mean, I think it's a last resort because, in fact, it's much better to write to the record companies or publishing companies and so on.
Yeah.
But if there's a contact, I think people sometimes think, yes, this might be a good route to go.
Right. Have you ever worked at Peter Gabriel's studios in Bath?
No, I haven't.
Yeah. They're meant to be state of the art. You're working on an album at the moment. What studios and whereabouts are you working with this?
Well, so far we've split the work between Britannia Row in Islington and a studio that Dave's built on a houseboat on the Thames.
Rather idyllic setting to work from, I should imagine.
It's terrific. I mean, I think it's so easy to go into these sort of underground vaults and become what someone described as a cave shrimp. And I think it's better for the music to work in an atmosphere that actually has some contact with the outside world.
And when can we as fans expect the new album?
Well, you as fans can... when can we as the band expect it? I think we should ask that. We'd love to get it finished this year, but however many ideas one has, records always seem to take longer than you expect to make.
When you were working on Dark Side of the Moon, did you have any intimation at all that you were going to be writing perhaps one of the biggest selling albums in British history, or an album that would stay on, as I have read, the American Billboard charts for a total of 14 years?
No, I mean, absolutely not. I think if we'd known that, we'd probably have failed to get anything done at all. It would just have been such a weight of sort of importance resting on it. I think we knew that we'd made our best album, right, and that it had qualities that earlier records hadn't had, but no, I don't think any of us envisaged. I mean, it had never really been... Up until then, the sort of record that stayed in the hit parade was The Sound of Music.
Right. That's amazing, isn't it? 14 years in the American Billboard charts. I mean, that's... no one can catch up to that. It's an incredible record. You weren't obviously deliberately setting out then to write an epic or to make an epic. It was just the follow-on from Medal.
Absolutely. No, it started with a collection of songs and then developed as an idea into linking the songs and then writing more songs to fill the story, to fill the idea out.
Right. In fact, some of the ideas for the start of this happened in your kitchen. So I mean,
my kitchen, yes.
What was the story behind that?
Have that kitchen taken out and put in a museum.
Exactly.
Well, it was really just the business of a band sitting around and talking not only about one song, but talking about an idea for the whole record. And I think there'd been so-called concept albums before that, but it was very new to us, and it seemed like a wonderful idea, and was something that went on from there.
Have you listened to it recently?
I have to say I haven't. No, I have a problem listening to old material.
Right. I was reading about Roger Waters said in the press a week ago that he'd listened to it. He'd said it didn't sound dated to him, but he thought the drumming, which is your contribution, sounds now very 70s because it's a lot quieter than drums in music today, which is really loud. It tends to have the drums up and the top end. Does that sort of seem fair to you?
Yes, I think that's fair comment. I think I've always thought the drums are too quiet on our records.
Fair enough too.
But I think it's to do with the way the records were put together and recording techniques and fashions in the way that instruments are weighted.
Does that mean that now when you're working, perhaps the drumming is a little more prominent than possibly others?
Well, I'll let you know when we finish the mixing. But
we'll eagerly await.
But I mean, historically, what's quite interesting is that, of course, when Dark Side was done, it was a period when the bass and drums would be put down earlier, and technology just meant that the drums actually would degrade generally through the overdubbing, and because we did a lot more overdubbing than other bands, there was a tendency, funnily enough, for things like drum sounds to degrade through the recording. And I think a lot of artists probably have suffered the same thing. The demos always sounded better than the final product.
Right, but that is a problem doesn't happen so much.
Not today.
Not today. As it happens, the song we're going to be seeing next on Rock Block is from Metal, not from Dark Side of the Moon. When you were, just to confuse ourselves a little bit here, when you were working, let's go backtrack, Metal, how much do you think Metal perhaps was a precursor or foresaw what you were going to do on Dark Side of the Moon?
Not very much. I mean, I suppose I'd suggest that Dark Side was almost a reaction to Metal, that Metal was fairly drawn out, and there was an attempt with Dark Side to condense things and make things happen faster and make the links sort of rush into something else. So I think it's more compressed on I mean, sort of musically, not technically compressed.
We're going to be playing Time next. It's a live version of Time off Dark Side of the Moon, but this particular song seems to have the hugest intro of a song that I can think of. Was it fairly relaxed when you were making Dark Side of the Moon? Did you ever worry that perhaps an audience might lose attention if they had these huge intros to get through?
No, but particularly as I was particularly involved in this intro, I think I probably thought they were very, very lucky to get so much of it. It was, I suppose it's, in a way, it's almost the intro is a piece in itself. Yes. But if you think of, I don't know, something like Layla, something like that, you get a sort of outro on that. I think it's an acceptable way of dealing with a song.
Yeah. Time is one of those ones that gets played over and over again, especially if you're listening to radio in America. They play Time a lot. It just is one of those ones that keeps coming back. Now, the clock sequence at the beginning, how was that done? Where were they recorded?
They were recorded at EMI, and I think we used a selection of the EMI sound effects library to find them all. I have to say, my memory begins to fade slightly, because particularly with the sort of collections of sound effects we've used over the years, I was thinking of something as a bike from one of our first records, and I suspect we probably used the same sound effects for some of that, clocks and ticks and tocks and watches.
Did you think that you might have given Alan Parsons headaches when he was working on the album with the demands that you wanted in terms of like sound effects and things? Was it difficult for him to come up and do what you wanted?
No, it wasn't. I don't think so. I think Alan was very sharp. He was the sort of new breed of EMI engineers at the time. When we first started at EMI, a lot of the engineers there had sort of recorded everything over the years, and perhaps a little bit more set in their ways, whereas Alan was the sort of the new generation, and I think he rose to every challenge and went on, of course, to do wonderful things on his own. At the time, I think we thought he was mad when he couldn't come and tour with us and work our mixing desk. We thought, well, that's Alan all over.
Up to him. What about the voices on the album? Everybody talks about the voices. They obviously augment the themes that link the album, aging, death. There's kind of a gloomy bent to Dark Side of the Moon, really, when you look at it as a whole. But the voices that link it and pop up every now and then, where did they come from, and what was the story behind those?
Well, we drew up a list of questions that we thought were relevant to the album, and then we tried to put all the people we had round us at the time into the studio on their own, simply pick up the card, read the question and answer it. And some people would give a short answer, some long. And we had people who worked at Abbey Road at the time answering the questions. We had people who worked for us, road crew and so on. We had Paul and Linda and Henry McCulloch, who were working in the studio next door. Our manager. It was sort of people who were around at the time. It was all done within a sort of 4-hour period, so it wasn't as though we went out and auditioned people for this. And we then took the ones that we felt were the most relevant or the most interesting, and there's one particularly. There's probably two most notable voices. One is... No, as I say it, I hear myself going,
gone.
Three. I think particularly of, there was a road manager who was known as Roger the Hat, who had a story about some driving experience where someone had cut him up at a traffic lights or something.
Yes.
And he's described it was the question about when did you last hit someone? And he said, he uses the phrase to describe it. He said the man was rude. He was very rude, but retribution was at hand. And then,
Perfect.
So something like that just has to be used. It's so good. And then Henry McCulloch and his wife, I think they'd had a fight the day before, so they were both very good on the subject of violence. And the other one was Jerry the Doorman, who was at EMI for years, and he came up trumps. Yes, he came up trumps. He's the one who says there is no dark side of the moon.
Oh, right. Yeah. What do you think Roger was actually trying to achieve with the lyrics on the album? What was he going for?
Well, I think it was to do with the discussion that we'd had, that this was an album about pressure and about life, and so in a way the band had already preset the ideas that were going to be explored in the songs, which was a very nice way of tackling it.
Yeah. Well, 25 million people plus.
Well, we're not sure if it's 25 million people or whether at least 5 million have got 2 copies.
Well, our producers got 3 or more, we know that for sure.
So it appeals to people with short-term memories.
This, more than any other album, seems to be the start of what came to be known as the concept album, and Pink Floyd almost to represent the dinosaur band. Do you think this is fair to say that this album was the beginning of that, I guess?
I think it's fair, and it's probably a compliment. Whether it's entirely accurate, I'm not sure. I think people had probably done albums that were... it depends whether one means concept album or whether one means... well, not what one means, but... people had already explored the business of being able to make records that were more than just a collection of singles.
Right.
And but it was still fairly new as a concept. People were still geared to this idea of radio play, and that a single was 2 minutes 30 seconds long.
Right. Which you didn't think of when you were making the album so much? Was that...
I think we thought about it, but realised that there were more interesting things to be done.
With the lyrics that we talked about before, and the fact that sometimes there is a fairly down feel to a lot of what's happening on the album, did you ever feel that it might have been a turn-off for your fans or your audience? Or...
I think the one thing that is probably true of most bands and most writers is that you cannot think about what your fans might or might not like, because it's too confusing. It's bad enough working out what you like or don't like. And so what you do is you get on with what you feel you're good at and then hope for the best. You know, if we could have written The Sound of Music, we probably would have done, but we didn't and couldn't. And so this was the way it turned out.
With the release of Dark Side of the Moon and its phenomenal success, did it change the band musically in any way? I mean, you obviously went from playing medium-sized venues, I guess, to the big stadiums.
I I think yes, it certainly, success certainly changes that aspect, and I think changes it for the better. It ensured that we could do the shows in the way we wanted. It gave us the opportunity to work film into the show. I think it was from Dark Side on we tended to work with film in the live shows. But of course it has a downside that it increases the pressure to recreate the same success and so on.
Right. I guess with the larger audiences too in your shows you have problems with people being quiet through the quiet bits and not screaming for money or whatever.
Yes, but I think once shows tend to sort of change. I think an indoor show is a much more controllable situation, whether it's a club with 500 people or an enormous indoor arena. It's when you move outdoors that it really changes the nature of the beast.
I was reading that Great Gig in the Sky was known as the Mortality Suite. Where did that come from? Who coined that phrase?
Well, I think there was a lot of discussion about what was happening on it, and it was the idea of the woman. The wailing women idea, and I mean Claire did a magnificent job. There'd been because it was done with very little discussion. I think each of us had some idea of what it should be, and we probably talked about it and talked to Claire about it. I remember for me at the time I'd been listening to some Kathy Barbarian music, and so that was in my mind when it was talked about. And we wanted something unusual, but of course we weren't that radical at the time that we were really ready for sort of 12-note rows and sort of Schoenberg.
So did she just come into the studio and practice, lay down stuff, and whatever you chose, what you wanted?
Yes, I think she probably did 2 or 3 practices and then 2 or 3.
It's an amazing voice.
Yeah.
I've also heard that that's used in sex shows in Amsterdam. That piece.
Well, you obviously get this information. This is generally withheld from me, but I'm more easily shockable.
What is your favourite track on the album?
I think possibly Us and Them. It's I like the music, and it has sort of strange memories because it originally was designed for a piece of music for Zabriskie Point, the Antonioni film.
Yeah.
And when we were working on that, the original idea of it came out there.
Was it used on the film in the end?
No, it wasn't. Antonioni kept finding our music too sad, and he used some pieces, but we never really finished the whole project. Was
it a strain for you guys to follow up such a successful album?
Yes, it's always difficult to follow successful albums, but I think with the music business or lots of other businesses, the ladder, the rungs are equally spaced on the ladder. Everything's difficult. Getting the first recording deal, getting the first record out, that being a hit, making the first album, and so on and so forth. So it's just another problem. All you can do is carry on doing what you think is best, not trying to second guess what your public would like. Right. And sort of you do have the advantages that after a successful record you have access to more studio time, and you probably have more time to work anyway.
Yes. Roger Waters has been quoted as saying that Dark Side of the Moon is his favourite album. Dave Gilmour has said that Wish You Were Here is his. What's yours? Do you have a favourite from your back catalogue?
I suppose Dark Side of the Moon for me. I think the atmosphere making the record was probably the best that we ever got it in terms of 4 people trying to work together and everyone doing what they were best at.
So it was a happy time making the album.
We play, I think, the way the act's developed in the last 6 months has been influenced rather a lot by the fact that we've played in ballrooms necessarily, because this is obviously the first market. But I think concerts have given us a chance to realise that maybe the music we play isn't directed at dancing necessarily like normal pop groups.
I see the group for the first time in my life.
This time?
This evening.
So
for the first time.
You like from the records?
Yes, I like it very much.
Have you heard of Sid Barrett?
Yes.
Early member. What do you think has happened to him?
The greatest.
It'd be a wonderful thing if one could imagine that Sid would become well again and everything would be happy and rosy, but the world doesn't work like that, so I'm sure that would... And his relevance in Pink Floyd wouldn't, I mean, that would not be, you know, when he left, there was very soon no relevance really for his type of thing, because the guy was definitely a genius. Some of the stuff he wrote is absolutely brilliant, I think.
Would you be kind enough to introduce yourself and the other guys out?
I'm Rick, and that's Nick.
Nick up on drums, right?
That's Sid, lead guitar. And
Sid?
And Roger, bass guitar.
And by the time we got to Dark Side of the Moon, we were touring, playing 12, 15,000 seaters, sold out the Hollywood Bowl and stuff like that. Then after Dark Side of the Moon, the whole sort of picture changed rather.
The business was saying, you can't do that, you can't do that, you can't do that. And we said, well, it doesn't matter, we're going to do it anyway.
This didn't start out of any concept or any marketing concept or anything to do with anything to do with any sort of promotion. It just happened as a band who built up a following by live performance.
We stayed together for a long time after that, but there was never really any kind of, you know, nice feeling of a group of people working together. After that point, there were terrible kind of arguments and disagreements all the way through Wish You Were Here and Animals and The Wall and The Final Cut.
It was a very difficult period. You've sort of achieved all your childhood's rock and roll dreams. When you've reached that sort of pinnacle of Dark Side of the Moon, you have to really ask yourself what you're still in it for. And it was a tough time. But I think in the end I came to the conclusion that I was in it for the music more than for anything else. A conclusion which I haven't really changed.
It's none of my business anymore, you know. Gilmour and Mason own the name Pink Floyd. That's it, finish. It's nothing to do with me.
In that separation we lost something and we gained something. That certainly, you always have some regrets about losing a talented person, don't you?